Are you lost too? Or just pretending you're not? The question hung in the cold night air like something fragile, something dangerous, something no one had ever dared to ask him before. The city moved around them in a blur of headlights and distant sirens, but under the flickering bus stop light, everything felt still. Ethan Carter sat there in a tailored charcoal coat that probably cost more than most people's rent, his hands resting loosely in his lap, his eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the street in front of him. To anyone passing by, he looked composed, successful, untouchable. But up close, there was something off. Something empty. Like a man who had everything, and still couldn't find where he belonged. Across from him stood a girl who looked like she had nothing at all. Lily Brooks pulled her oversized hoodie tighter around her frame, the sleeves swallowing her hands as a gust of wind slipped through the broken edge of the bus shelter. Her sneakers were worn thin, the soles barely holding together, and her backpack sat at her feet like it carried everything she owned, which, in truth, it did. She had been standing there for 20 minutes, maybe more, watching buses come and go without getting on a single one, because she didn't have anywhere left to go. And yet, somehow, she was the one who had asked the question. Ethan blinked, slow, almost like he wasn't used to being spoken to without an agenda behind it. Not a business deal, not a polite introduction, not someone trying to impress him or get something from him. Just a question. Simple, direct, human. What makes you think I'm lost? He asked, his voice calm, measured, but softer than he expected it to be. Lily shrugged, shifting her weight as she glanced at him, then away again, like she wasn't trying to be rude, just honest. You've been sitting here for a while, she said. Not checking your phone, not calling anyone, just sitting. She paused, then added quietly, people who know where they're going don't usually do that. Ethan let out a faint breath that almost resembled a laugh, but didn't quite make it there. She wasn't wrong. He had canceled 3 meetings that night, ignored 5 calls, left a dinner where people in tailored suits discussed mergers like they were talking about the weather. And somehow he had ended up here, on a cracked plastic bench under a broken light, like a man who had taken a wrong turn and didn't care enough to find his way back. Maybe I'm just waiting, he said. Lily tilted her head slightly. For what? He didn't answer right away, because the truth was he didn't know. And that realization settled in his chest heavier than anything he had felt in years. Lily nodded slowly, like she understood more than she let on, then sank down onto the bench beside him, leaving just enough space to be polite, but not enough to feel distant. The wind picked up again, brushing strands of her hair across her face. She didn't move to fix it. I think people say they're waiting, she murmured, staring out at the empty street, when they don't want to admit they're lost. Ethan turned his head slightly, studying her now, really studying her. Not the worn clothes or the tired posture, but the way she spoke, like someone who had already figured out something most people spent their entire lives avoiding. And you? He asked quietly. Are you lost? Lily let out a small breath, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, she said. I am. She didn't dress it up, didn't hide it, just said it like a fact. And somehow, that honesty hit harder than anything else. A bus roared past without stopping, the rush of wind rattling the loose panel above them. Neither of them moved. For a moment, the world felt reduced to just 2 people sitting under a dim light, both pretending in their own ways, both caught in a place they didn't quite belong. Ethan looked down at his hands, then back at the empty road ahead, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar. Not pressure, not expectation, not control, just awareness, like he had been walking through his own life without ever really seeing it. And somehow, it took a girl with nothing to make him realize that. He exhaled slowly, his voice quieter now, stripped of the usual certainty that defined him. Then I guess we're both in the same place, he said. Lily nodded, pulling her hoodie tighter as the cold crept in again. Yeah, she whispered. I guess we are. And neither of them knew it yet, but that simple moment, one question, one honest answer, was about to change everything. The silence between them did not feel awkward. It felt honest, like 2 strangers accidentally telling the truth in a world that preferred pretending. And for a while neither of them spoke again, just sitting there as another gust of wind pushed through the broken edge of the shelter and rattled the loose plastic panel above their heads. Lily tucked her hands deeper into her sleeves and glanced at the street as if expecting something to appear that never did, while Ethan remained still. Unusually still, as if leaving too soon would break whatever this moment was. "You are not from around here, are you?" Lily said after a while, not looking at him directly, just observing, and Ethan almost smiled at that, because technically he owned half the buildings within a 5-mile radius. Yet somehow she was right. "What gave it away?" he asked, and she shrugged lightly. "Your coat, your shoes. The way you sit like you are waiting for something important, not just a bus." She paused, then added, "And the fact that you are still here even though nothing is coming." That last part landed differently, because she was not just talking about the bus, and Ethan felt it, the quiet accuracy of it. "Maybe I missed it," he said, more to himself than to her, and Lily nodded like she understood that too well. "Yeah," she murmured. "That happens." A car passed by, headlights sweeping across their faces for a second before disappearing into the distance. And in that brief flash of light, Ethan noticed something he had missed before, the faint exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that did not come from a long day, but from too many long days stacked on top of each other. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" he asked, the question coming out more direct than he intended. Lily hesitated, just for a second, then shook her head. "Not really," she said, her tone casual, almost like she was talking about the weather. But the way her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of her sleeve told a different story. "I mean, I will figure something out," she added quickly, as if she needed to make it sound less serious than it was. Ethan leaned back slightly, looking up at the dim light above them, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something that did not come with a strategy attached to it. Not a calculation, not a decision, just a quiet awareness of another person's reality colliding with his own. "What were you doing before this?" he asked, and Lily let out a soft breath. "Trying to keep a job that did not want to keep me," she said with a faint smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Coffee shop, downtown, minimum wage, maximum attitude. From customers." She glanced at him briefly. "You would hate it." Ethan almost laughed, because she was probably right. "And now?" he asked, and she shrugged again. "Now I am just in between things," she said, and that phrase hung there, heavier than it sounded, because in between things could mean anything. It could mean starting over, or it could mean having nothing left to start with. Another bus passed without stopping, the empty seats visible through the windows for a split second before vanishing. Lily watched it go, then looked down at her shoes, pressing the sole lightly against the pavement as if testing how much longer they would hold together. Ethan followed her gaze, and something about that small, quiet action stayed with him, the kind of detail most people would miss. But he did not. Not anymore. Not after that question she had asked. He exhaled slowly, his mind moving in a direction he did not expect, connecting pieces that should not have belonged together. His world of contracts and negotiations, and this girl sitting beside him with everything she owned in a worn backpack. "What if?" he started, then stopped, the words catching in his throat because for once, he was not sure how they would sound out loud. Lily glanced at him, curious but cautious. "What if what?" she asked, and Ethan looked at her fully now, not as a stranger, not as a passing moment, but as someone standing at the same invisible edge he had been standing on for far too long, and for the first time, the idea forming in his mind did not feel like a business decision. It felt like something else, something riskier, something real. "What if being lost," he said slowly, "is the only reason people ever find something that actually matters?" Lily studied him for a second, then let out a quiet breath. "Then I hope we are really, really lost," she said. And somehow, that answer made the next thing he was about to say impossible to take back. The city hummed in the background, distant and indifferent, but under that flickering light, something had shifted, something neither of them fully understood yet, but both of them felt, and Ethan knew, with a clarity that surprised him, that whatever came next was not going to be simple. Ethan did not speak immediately after her words, but something inside him had already made the decision before he even understood it, and that was what unsettled him the most, because every major move in his life had always been calculated, measured, negotiated down to the smallest detail. But this felt different. This felt like stepping into something without knowing the outcome, and yet somehow not wanting to control it. He shifted slightly on the bench, his gaze steady now, no longer distant, but focused entirely on her. What if I could fix that? He said quietly, and Lily frowned a little, not defensive, just confused. Fix what? She asked, and he hesitated for a fraction of a second, choosing his words carefully, not because he did not know what to say, but because for the first time, he wanted to say it right. The part where you do not have somewhere to go, he replied, and the air between them changed, subtle, but undeniable. Lily straightened slightly, her guard rising just enough to be noticeable. People do not just fix things like that for strangers, she said, her tone still calm, but no longer as open as before, and Ethan nodded, because she was right. That was exactly how the world worked, or at least how it was supposed to work. You are right, he said. They usually do not. He paused, then added, but I am not talking about charity. That word landed differently, sharper, more defined, and Lily's eyes narrowed just a little. Then what are you talking about? She asked, and Ethan exhaled slowly, as if releasing the last bit of hesitation he had left. An arrangement, he said, and even as the word left his mouth, he knew how it sounded, cold, structured, familiar to him but completely foreign to her world. Lily let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. That sounds exactly like something I should walk away from, she said, and she was already shifting slightly, as if preparing to stand, but Ethan spoke again, not louder, not forceful, just steady. What if it benefits both of us? He said, and that made her pause, not because she trusted him, but because she understood what it meant to have nothing left to lose. She did not sit back fully, but she did not leave either. Explain, she said, simply, and Ethan leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his voice lower now, more grounded. I need someone, he began, then stopped, adjusting the phrasing. I need a wife. That word hung there, heavy, unexpected, almost absurd in the context of a broken bus stop at night. Lily blinked, certain she had heard him wrong. I am sorry, what? She said, and Ethan held her gaze, not smiling, not joking, completely serious. Not a real marriage, he clarified quickly. A contract. He added, because that was the language he understood, the structure he could control. 1 year, he continued. Public appearances, events, a name that fits the expectations people have of me. He paused, letting that settle before adding the part that mattered to her. In return, you get a place to live, financial security, and a fresh start. Lily stared at him now, really stared, searching for something that would make this make sense, because it did not in any normal version of reality. You are serious, she said, and it was not a question, it was disbelief trying to find solid ground. Yes, Ethan answered without hesitation, and the certainty in his voice made it harder to dismiss. Lily looked away, her mind racing, the sound of another distant bus approaching and fading blending into the noise in her head. Why me? She asked finally, her voice quieter now, and Ethan did not look away. Because you asked me if I was lost, he said, and you were not afraid of the answer. Lily swallowed slightly, the weight of that explanation far heavier than any logical reason he could have given, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The city continued moving around them, unaware that under a broken light, two lives were standing on the edge of something neither of them could fully see yet, and Lily realized, with a clarity that both terrified and steadied her, that this was not just an offer, it was a turning point, the kind that did not come twice. And if I say no? She asked softly, and Ethan nodded once. Then nothing changes, he said. You walk away, and we both go back to being lost on our own. The simplicity of that answer made it harder than any pressure ever could. Lily looked down at her worn shoes again, then at the empty street ahead, and for the first time that night, she was not just thinking about where she would sleep, she was thinking about who she might become if she said yes. Lily did not answer right away, and that silence carried more weight than anything she could have said, because this was not just a decision, it was a line between the life she had been surviving and something completely unknown, something structured, controlled, and dangerously tempting. She pulled her hands out of her sleeves slowly, flexing her fingers as if grounding herself in something real before she spoke. 1 year. She repeated softly, testing the words like they did not quite belong in her world. Ethan nodded once, steady, patient, not pushing, not rushing. which only made it feel more real. And then what? She asked, her eyes lifting to meet his again, searching for the part no one ever said out loud. Then we walk away, he answered. Clean, simple, no strings. And that word simple almost made her laugh, because nothing about this felt simple, not the way he said it, not the way it sat in her chest, not the way it made her think about everything she had lost, and everything she might gain. Nothing is ever that clean, she said quietly, and Ethan did not argue, because he knew that better than anyone. But he also knew something else, something he had built his entire life on. It can be if the rules are clear, he said. And there it was again. The difference between them. She lived in uncertainty. He lived in terms and conditions. Lily looked down at the pavement, tracing a small crack with the tip of her shoe. What kind of rules? She asked, and Ethan straightened slightly, his voice shifting just enough to reveal the world he came from, the world of structure and control. We define everything, he said. No expectations beyond the contract, no emotional obligations, no interference in each other's personal choices. He paused, then added, we present a united image in public, attend required events, and maintain discretion at all times. Lily listened, and the more he spoke, the more it started to sound less like a life and more like a role, like something she would have to perform instead of live. And what about real things? She asked, her voice quieter now, like how people actually feel. Ethan held her gaze, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something uncertain in his eyes, something he did not usually allow. Feelings complicate things, he said, not cold, just honest. And that answer settled between them. Heavy and clear, Lily nodded slowly, as if she had expected that. Because people like him did not build lives around feelings, they built them around control. She pulled her backpack a little closer to her feet, instinctively protective, as if reminding herself where she came from. And if I break one of your rules? She asked, and Ethan did not hesitate. Then the contract ends, he said simply. Immediately. There was no threat in his voice, just certainty, and that made it more real than anything else. Lily took a slow breath, her eyes drifting toward the dark street again, where nothing was waiting for her. No apartment, no job, no plan, just another night of figuring it out as she went. And then she looked back at him, at the man who had just offered her something that could change everything, but at a cost she could not fully measure yet. You really think people can just agree not to feel anything? She asked, and Ethan's expression softened just slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but enough for her to see it. I think people can agree on boundaries, he said, and maybe that was the closest thing to honesty he could give. Lily studied him for a moment longer, then let out a quiet breath, her shoulders lowering just a fraction, not in surrender, but in acceptance of the reality in front of her. And where does this contract start? She asked, and Ethan reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a sleek card. Simple, understated, but unmistakably expensive. He held it out to her, not forcing it into her hand, just offering it. Tomorrow morning, he said. 9 o'clock, my office. Lily looked at the card but did not take it right away, as if once she touched it, everything would become real in a way she could not undo. The wind moved through the shelter again, colder this time, sharper, and she finally reached out, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface before taking it fully. And in that small, quiet motion, something shifted, something irreversible, because this was no longer just a conversation, it was a choice. And for the first time in a long time, Lily was not just trying to survive the next hour. She was standing at the edge of a life she never imagined she would even be offered. The card felt heavier than it should have in Lily's hand, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. And for a long moment after Ethan stood and walked away, disappearing into the quiet rhythm of the city like he had never been there at all, she remained on that cracked bench under the flickering light, staring down at the name embossed in clean, sharp letters as if it might change if she looked long enough. But it did not. Nothing about this was going to change unless she did. The night stretched on around her, colder now, quieter, and eventually another bus came and went without her even noticing, because her mind was somewhere else entirely, somewhere between fear and possibility. And when she finally stood, pulling her backpack onto her shoulder, it was not with certainty, but with something close to it, something that felt like a decision forming even if she had not said it out loud yet. The next morning came too quickly, sunlight cutting through the tall glass buildings of downtown like a reminder that the world kept moving no matter what choices people made inside it. Lily stood across the street from a building that did not look real to her, its polished exterior reflecting the sky, so perfectly it almost disappeared into it. People in tailored suits moved in and out with purpose, their steps confident, their lives clearly defined in ways hers had never been. She looked down at her clothes, the same hoodie, the same worn jeans, and for a second, doubt crept in sharp and sudden. This was not her world. It never had been, and stepping into it felt like stepping into someone else's life. But then her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack, and she remembered the cold bench, the empty street, the question she had asked, and the answer she had been given. And slowly, she crossed the street, each step deliberate, each breath steadying her just enough to keep going. Inside, everything was quiet in a way that felt expensive, the kind of quiet that came from control, not absence. A receptionist looked up, her expression shifting almost instantly as she took in Lily's appearance, not rude, but measured, professional, and slightly confused. "Can I help you?" she asked, and Lily hesitated for half a second before pulling out the card, placing it gently on the counter like it might disappear if she was not careful. "I have a meeting," she said, her voice softer than she wanted it to be. The receptionist glanced down at the card, then back at Lily, and something changed immediately. Her posture straightened, her tone sharpened into respect. "Of course, Miss Brooks," she said, and that name, spoken like it belonged in this place, felt strange, almost unreal. Lily followed directions she barely heard, her heart beat louder than anything else around her as she stepped into an elevator that moved too smoothly, too quietly, carrying her higher and higher until the doors opened into a space that did not look like an office so much as it looked like a statement. Glass walls, clean lines, the city stretching endlessly beyond it. And in the center of it all stood Ethan Carter, exactly as he had been the night before, and yet completely different, his presence sharper here, more defined. Like this was the version of him the world recognized. He turned as she stepped in, his expression calm, unreadable. But there was something else there too, something almost imperceptible, like he had been expecting her and had not been entirely sure she would come. "You made it," he said simply, and Lily nodded, her eyes moving around the room before settling back on him, grounding herself in the one thing that had felt real the night before. "I guess I did," she replied, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke, because now that she was here, this was no longer an idea, no longer a possibility. It was real, and Ethan took a step closer, not enough to overwhelm, just enough to close the distance between who they had been last night and who they were about to become. "Once we start this," he said, his voice steady, controlled, "there is no going back to how things were before." Lily met his gaze, her grip tightening slightly around the strap of her backpack, and for the first time since she walked in, there was no hesitation in her eyes, just clarity shaped by everything she had already lost. "There is nothing to go back to," she said quietly. And that was the moment everything shifted, not because of the contract, not because of the money, but because she had just stepped forward without looking back, and Ethan saw it, the kind of decision that could not be undone, the kind that changed people whether they were ready or not. He nodded once, then gestured toward the table behind him where a neatly prepared document waited. Crisp, precise, final. "Then let us begin," he said, and Lily took a step forward, leaving behind the last version of her life with nothing but a single choice and a name she had not yet fully stepped into. Lily stood at the edge of the table, the document laid out before her like something both simple and irreversible. The paper crisp, the text clean and precise, every clause carefully constructed to remove uncertainty, and yet the weight of it had nothing to do with the words themselves. It was what those words would turn her into. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the page before pulling back slightly. Not out of fear exactly, but out of awareness. This was the moment. Everything shifted from possibility into reality. Ethan watched her without interrupting, his posture composed, his expression neutral, but his attention completely fixed on her. Not the contract, not the outcome, just her, Because this decision had to be hers in a way that no negotiation could influence. Take your time, he said quietly, and that alone was different from anything she expected. No pressure, no urgency, just space. And Lily let out a slow breath, lowering herself into the chair. The leather cool against her hands as she leaned forward, her eyes scanning the first lines, the language formal, structured, distant, party A and party B, like they were not even people, like this was something that existed outside of emotion entirely. She swallowed lightly, turning the page, her mind catching on certain phrases: duration, public representation, confidentiality, termination conditions, each one reinforcing the same truth. This was not a life. It was an agreement, and yet, beneath all of it, there was something else, something unspoken, something that had started at a broken bus stop under a flickering light. She glanced up at Ethan, just for a second, as if to remind herself that this was not just paper, this was a person standing on the other side of it. "You really believe this will work?" she asked, her voice softer now, less guarded, and Ethan did not hesitate. "I believe clarity prevents chaos," he said, and that answer was exactly who he was: measured, controlled, certain. Lily nodded slowly, looking back down at the document, because she understood something too. Chaos was all she had known for a long time, and maybe this, as strange as it was, offered something different, something stable. Her fingers tightened slightly around the pen resting beside the pages, but she did not pick it up yet. "There is one more thing," Ethan said, and that made her pause, her eyes lifting again, this time sharper, more alert, because additions meant changes, and changes meant risk. He stepped closer to the table, not invading her space, just enough to make his presence clearer. "There is a clause I have not included in writing," he continued, and Lily's brows pulled together slightly. "Why not?" she asked, and Ethan held her gaze, steady, honest in a way that did not rely on the contract between them. "Because it is not enforceable," he said, and that answer alone was enough to shift the air between them again. Lily straightened slightly, the pen now in her hand without her realizing when she had picked it up. "Then say it," she said, and Ethan took a breath, not long, not dramatic, just enough to choose the words carefully. "If you fall in love," he said, his voice calm but unmistakably firm, "you leave." The words settled into the room like something final, something that did not need to be written to be real. Lily did not react immediately, but something in her expression changed, subtle, almost invisible, like a door closing quietly inside her before it could ever fully open. "That is your condition," she said, not as a question, but as a confirmation, and Ethan nodded once. "It is a boundary," he replied, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, because that one sentence had revealed more than any page of the contract ever could. It was not just about control. It was about protection, not from her, but from something he refused to allow into his world. Lily looked down at the paper again, the words now clearer, sharper, as if everything had come into focus all at once. This was not just about becoming someone else. It was about making sure she never became too much. Her grip on the pen steadied, her hesitation gone, not because the decision was easy, but because it was now fully understood. She placed the tip against the line, her name waiting there like something she had never seen before, and without looking up again, she signed it, slow, deliberate, final, and in that single motion, Lily Brooks stepped into a life defined by rules, by boundaries, by a name that would open every door she had ever been locked out of. And Ethan Carter watched as the last space between them closed, not by emotion, not by connection, but by agreement. And yet somewhere beneath it all, something far less predictable had already begun. The sound of the pen leaving the paper was softer than Lily expected, but it echoed in her chest like something much louder, something final. And for a brief second after she signed her name, she did not move, as if staying still could hold on to the version of herself that had existed just moments before. Ethan stepped forward then, his hand reaching for the document with a quiet efficiency, glancing over her signature not to verify it, but to acknowledge it. And when he looked back at her, something had shifted, not in emotion, but in certainty. "It is done," he said, and those 3 words carried a weight that neither of them fully understood yet. Lily exhaled slowly, leaning back in the chair, her fingers still loosely holding the pen as if she had forgotten to let it go. "So what happens now?" she asked, and Ethan did not hesitate, because this part he knew. "Now we begin," he replied, and within seconds, the quiet, controlled space of his office began to change. A woman entered with a tablet in hand, her posture sharp, her movements precise. "Miss Brooks," she said with a polite nod. "I am Claire. I will be assisting you with the transition." And the word transition sounded almost too simple for what was actually happening. Lily blinked, caught slightly off guard by how quickly everything was moving, how quickly her life was being reorganized into something structured, something planned. "Transition," she repeated under her breath, and Claire offered a small, professional smile. "Wardrobe, schedule, media briefing, residency arrangements," she listed calmly, each word stacking on top of the last until it felt like Lily was being rewritten in real time. Ethan watched from a distance, his role already shifting, no longer the man at the bus stop, but the one who built systems that people stepped into, and Lily stood slowly, setting the pen down as if placing the last piece of her old life behind her. "You will need to come with me," Claire continued, gesturing toward the door, and Lily hesitated, just for a second, her eyes flickering toward Ethan, not for permission, but for something else, something she could not quite define, and he noticed, of course he noticed, but instead of softening it, instead of breaking the boundary they had just set, he simply nodded once. "Everything you need will be arranged," he said, his voice steady, controlled, exactly the way it had been when this all started. And that was the moment Lily understood something important. The man who sat with her under that broken light was still here, but this version of him, this version was the one the world knew. And if she was going to survive in this new life, she would have to learn how to stand in it without losing herself completely. "Okay," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. And then she followed Claire out of the room, the door closing softly behind her, leaving Ethan alone in the silence he had built so carefully. But for a brief moment, he did not move, his gaze lingering on the empty space where she had been standing, as if something about her presence had disrupted the perfect order he relied on. And then, just as quickly, he turned away, picking up his phone, stepping back into the world that required him to be exactly who he had always been. While down the hall, Lily walked through a space that felt too polished, too perfect, each step echoing slightly against the floor as Claire spoke beside her, outlining plans, schedules, expectations, but Lily barely heard the details, because her mind was somewhere else, caught between the girl who had slept on a bench and the woman who now had a name attached to a contract, worth more than she could even comprehend. They stopped in front of a large mirrored room, and Claire gestured inside. "We will start here," she said, and Lily stepped in slowly, her reflection staring back at her from every angle. The same worn clothes, the same tired eyes, but somehow different already, because now she knew this was the last time she would see herself like this. She took a small step forward, her fingers brushing lightly against the mirror, as if confirming that she was still there beneath everything that was about to change. And for the first time since she signed her name, a quiet realization settled in her chest. This was not just about becoming someone new. It was about not disappearing in the process. The room did not feel like a place for people. It felt like a place for transformation. Bright lights casting no shadows, mirrors stretching from floor to ceiling, so there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to look without seeing yourself from every angle. Lily stood there in silence as stylists moved around her with quiet efficiency, measuring, observing, adjusting, speaking in calm, professional tones that sounded more like instructions than conversation. And for the first time since she walked into the building, she felt something close to being out of control, not in a chaotic way, but in a precise, controlled way that left no space for her to decide anything at all. "We will start with posture," one of them said gently, guiding her shoulders back, lifting her chin just slightly, and the small movement changed everything. Not her, not yet, but the way she appeared, and Lily caught her reflection in the mirror again, noticing how a simple adjustment made her look less like someone trying to disappear and more like someone expected to be seen. "Good," the stylist added, stepping back, and Lily nodded faintly, even though she was not sure what she was agreeing to anymore. Time moved differently in that room, measured not in minutes, but in changes, Clothes replaced, hair styled, details refined until the girl who had walked in began to fade into something more polished, more defined. And yet with every change, there was a quiet tension building inside her, not resistance, but awareness, because she could feel it happening. Feel the shift from who she had been to who she was expected to become. Hours later, when Claire returned, she paused for just a second in the doorway, her eyes taking in the result with a level of approval that did not need to be spoken. "We are almost there," she said, and Lily turned toward her, the movement smoother now, more deliberate, like she had already learned something she did not realize she was learning. "Almost where?" Lily asked, and Claire's expression remained calm. But there was a slight softening in her tone. "Where people believe you belong," she answered, and that sentence settled deeper than anything else had so far, because that was the real goal, not to change her, but to make the world accept the version of her they needed to see. Later that evening, the transition moved beyond mirrors and into reality. A car waited outside, sleek and silent, the city lights reflecting across its surface as if even the street knew something important was happening. Lily stepped out of the building, the air cooler now, the sounds of the city louder than they had been all day. And for a brief moment, she hesitated, not because she wanted to turn back, but because she realized there was no version of back left for her anymore. Ethan stood near the car, already dressed for the event, his presence commanding without effort, his posture precise, his expression unreadable in the way it always was when the world was watching. He looked at her then, and for a fraction of a second, something shifted in his gaze, something unspoken, not surprise, not approval, but recognition, as if he was seeing the result of a decision that had started in a place far removed from this one. "You are ready," he said, and Lily met his eyes, holding his gaze just long enough to steady herself. "I am prepared," she corrected softly, and that distinction mattered more than either of them said out loud, because ready implied certainty, and prepared implied effort, and she was still very much the second one. Ethan gave a slight nod, acknowledging the difference without questioning it, and as they stepped into the car together, the city began to blur outside the window, lights stretching into lines as they moved forward, toward a place where everything would be tested, not the contract, not the rules, but the illusion they were about to present to the world. Lily glanced down at her hands, resting calmly in her lap, no longer hidden in oversized sleeves, no longer trembling from the cold, but steady, composed, and yet beneath that stillness, she could feel it, the quiet echo of the girl who had asked a simple question at a broken bus stop, the one who had not been afraid of the answer. And as the car slowed to a stop in front of a brightly lit building filled with people who would judge everything they saw, Lily took a slow breath, her reflection briefly visible in the glass before the door opened. And in that moment, she understood something clearly. This was not just about stepping into a new life. It was about holding on to the truth of who she was while everyone else tried to define her for her. And as Ethan stepped out first, extending his hand toward her with practiced ease, Lily looked at it for just a second before placing her hand in his, not as someone being led, but as someone choosing to walk forward on her own terms. The moment Lily stepped out of the car, the world shifted again, not in silence this time, but in noise, flashes of cameras cutting through the night, voices overlapping, names being called, and for a brief second, it felt like the ground beneath her was no longer steady. But then Ethan's hand remained firm around hers, not tight, not controlling, just present, and that small, controlled gesture grounded her more than anything else could. "Stay close," he murmured, not as an order, but as a reminder of the role they had agreed to play, and Lily nodded slightly, her posture aligning instinctively with his, her steps measured, deliberate, as they moved forward together, the doors opening to a space filled with light and expectation, people turning, watching, assessing, and Lily could feel it, the weight of their attention, the silent questions, the judgments already forming before she had even said a word. But she did not look away, she did not shrink, because something inside her had shifted the moment she signed that contract. Not confidence, not yet, but a decision to stand where she was placed without apologizing for it. "Ethan," a voice called out, and a man approached with an easy smile that did not quite reach his eyes, his gaze flicking briefly to Lily, before returning to Ethan. "You did not mention you were bringing someone," he said, and the implication behind those words was clear, curiosity mixed with skepticism, and for a fraction of a second, the air tightened. This was the moment, the first real test, not written in any clause, not outlined in any agreement, but just as important as anything they had signed. Ethan did not hesitate, his hand shifting slightly, not gripping hers, but aligning with it, reinforcing the connection they were presenting. "This is Lily," he said, his tone calm, confident, unquestionable. "My wife." The word landed with a clarity that cut through the noise around them, and Lily felt it, not as a title, but as a statement that changed how every person in that room would see her from this moment forward. She met the man's gaze, offering a small, composed smile, not overplayed, not uncertain, just enough to acknowledge his presence without seeking approval. "Nice to meet you," she said, her voice steady. And something shifted, subtle but immediate. The skepticism did not disappear, but it adjusted, reshaped into something more cautious, more observant. And as the conversation moved on, as more people approached, more names exchanged, more eyes turned toward her, Lily found her rhythm, not by becoming someone else, but by holding onto the quiet clarity she had felt at that bus stop. The version of herself that had not been afraid to ask a question no one else would ask, and it showed in the way she listened, in the way she responded, in the way she did not try too hard to belong, but instead simply stood where she was. And Ethan noticed, of course he noticed, the way she moved through a world that should have overwhelmed her, the way she adapted without losing the edge of honesty that had drawn his attention in the first place. And for a moment, just a moment, something unfamiliar pressed against the boundary he had set so carefully, something that did not fit within the rules he had created, but he pushed it back, controlled, contained, because that was what he did. That was what he had always done. The night continued, conversations blending into one another, the rhythm of the event steady and predictable. But beneath it, something else was building, something neither of them fully acknowledged yet, until it happened, not in a grand moment, not in front of everyone, but in something small, something quiet. Lily stepped away for a brief moment, standing near a large window that overlooked the city, the lights stretching endlessly below, and for the first time since they arrived, she allowed herself to exhale fully, her shoulders lowering just slightly, her reflection faint in the glass. And Ethan found her there, not because he was looking for her, but because somehow his attention had been tracking her without him realizing it. He stopped a few feet away, watching her for a second before speaking. "You handled that well," he said, and Lily turned, her expression softer now, less guarded than it had been inside. "I just did not pretend," she replied, and that answer lingered between them, because it was the one thing their entire arrangement was built on avoiding. Ethan held her gaze, and for a brief moment, the distance between contract and reality blurred, just enough to be noticed. "That is not always an option here," he said quietly, and Lily tilted her head slightly, studying him the same way she had that first night. "Maybe that is the problem," she said, and there it was again, that honesty, that quiet defiance of the rules he had built, and something inside him shifted, not enough to break anything, not yet, but enough to remind him that no matter how carefully he defined the boundaries, some things could not be controlled. The city lights reflected between them, distant and endless, and in that moment, neither of them realized it yet, but the line they had drawn so clearly was already beginning to blur.